My Lords, I know the whole House will have heard with sadness of the death of Lord Gardiner, formerly Lord Chancellor, on the 7th of January of this year. The noble and learned Lord Gardiner was unique in our times in that he came to the woolsack without having served in the House of Commons or on the bench. He held the post of Lord Chancellor with great distinction from 1964 to 1970, and during those years he initiated many of the projects of law reform which have, in the intervening years, entrenched themselves in our system of justice. There will, I think, be many of your lordships who know more intimately than I the scale of his achievements. Lord Gardiner presided over the creation of the Family Division of the High Court, of the Law Commission, and of the Ombudsman. And as many of your lordships will recall, it was he who started the first compulsory training for magistrates. Passionate and unshakable in his beliefs, he worked tirelessly over the years towards further humanizing and liberalizing the law. After his tenure of office, his concern for penal reform endured, as his chairmanship of Justice, his membership of the International Commission of Jurists, and his presidency of the Howard League for Penal Reform testified. Yet he still found time not only to become Chancellor of the Open University, but to achieve an Open University degree as well. Lord Gardiner brought a fine presence to the office of Lord Chancellor. As many of your lordships will remember, he was a courteous and most persuasive speaker, as befits a man who had acted professionally on the stage in his youth with Gerald du Maurier, and was one of the most formidable advocates of his generation. In recent years, he had been able to take less part in the work of the House, but I know that your lordships will wish to join with me in offering every sympathy to Lady Gardiner and in expressing the belief that his memory will live on in his achievements.
My Lords, we are grateful to the noble Lord, the Leader of the House, for his generous tribute to our late noble and learned friend, Lord Gardiner. The noble Lord referred to the milestones of Lord Gardiner's distinguished career, which culminated in his elevation to the woolsack in 1964. He will be remembered as one of the great lawyers of this century, but it is of interest that he was also attracted to the stage, as the noble Lord has just said, and that Gerald du Maurier, for whom he acted in a West End production, had a very high regard for his talents as an actor. There does seem to be a certain affinity between the stage and the bar, as we've observed in this House from time to time. My Lords, we remember Gerald Gardiner's impressive progress in the years after he took Silk in 1948, during which he gained a reputation as a formidable and fearless advocate. It was an experience to hear his calm and lucid exposition of a case. But Gerald Gardiner did not stop there, as he might well have done. He pursued other causes, notably law reform, and his work both in and out of office will be remembered in years to come. He was indeed the natural choice to be Lord Chancellor when my noble friend Lord Wilson formed his first administration in 1964. We were fortunate to have a man of his distinction and intellect in so crucial an office. As the noble Lord said, he was the first Lord Chancellor in modern times not to have served in the House of Commons, nor to have sat on the bench. The appointment was more than justified, because he presided over so many radical changes that will need a number of books to do them full justice. He was more the great lawyer than the politician, as I discovered when I had the privilege of sitting in cabinet with him. When dealing with political issues, he was always brief and to the point, which set him apart from the rest of us. My Lords, he was not aloof and cold, as some have said. He was kind and considerate to me as a younger colleague, although there was also a shyness about him and an innocence too. He did not cultivate publicity and never sought to be a household name, but he will nevertheless go down in history as one of the great reforming Lord Chancellors, as well as a man of great dignity, charm and generosity. We send our deep sympathies to Lady Gardiner and to his daughter.
My Lords, this is the second occasion second melancholy occasion within a few weeks when we have paid tribute to a departed Lord Chancellor. Gerald Gardiner, 10 years older, had not been recently amongst us in the way that Elwyn-Jones had been. Indeed, I do not think that I was ever present in this house with him. But there was nonetheless a time when I had just as close an association with him. He was Lord Chancellor when I was first Home Secretary. That was in the swinging 60s, which are sometimes now portrayed as the fount of all evils. I do not know whether or not this will be taken as a tribute by the majority of your lordships or not, but I think I can say that he and I were always at one on the life and liberty legislation of those days. This was in some ways surprising, for we were not otherwise at all alike in background, cast of mind, attitudes to politics or pleasure, shape, or anything else. But it was a great sustenance for a young and perhaps impetuous Home Secretary to have a 20-year older Lord Chancellor of high legal repute, though occasionally of a little impetuosity himself too, protecting, as it were, his flank. Nor was it only on what might be called the softer side of the legislation that he sustained me. I remember that when I was deciding whether to introduce majority verdicts in criminal trials, then a very controversial step, I was much encouraged to discover that Gerald Gardiner agreed with me. So did the noble Lord Hailsham, so did the noble Lord Hutchinson of Lullington, and I thought it protected by Lord Gardiner and Lord Hutchinson, I could not be affronting civil liberties very deeply. Lord Gardiner was immensely diligent. I remember him once telling me that he practically never got to sleep between 2:30 or 3 a.m. because he read all his cabinet papers, word for word, after midnight. Paradoxically, he spoke very little in cabinet, but his lasting impact was probably greater than that of those of us who chattered away. The Law Commission and the reforms which have stemmed from it is his principal monument. I increasingly feel it to be the author of a major statute which sets up a continuing institution and which, because of its inherent sense and utility, is not tampered with by subsequent governments, is of more influence than matters which occupy the foreground of politics, such as the management of the economy, where everything is quickly washed away by the next wave of improvidence or misjudgment. I remember not only Gerald Gardiner's achievements and words of wisdom and encouragement, but also his shy charm and the peculiarly sweet smile which frequently illuminated his otherwise austere countenance. In a winter when we have bade farewell to the last two of them, it is perhaps appropriate to recall that there was not a single one of my former party's 5 Lord Chancellors who has not looked every inch the part. Gerald Gardiner did not perhaps have Haldane's Edwardian authority and massive experience of men and affairs, or Jowett's features cast in an almost Roman parchment. But on the woolsack he certainly epitomized not only liberal conscience, but also legal distinction. I do not know what the future may hold, or who would be the 6th if ever there was one to join this formidable gallery. And it would be a very formidable one to join. But in that gallery, no one has, I think, left a greater reforming imprint, nor was a nicer man than Gerald Gardiner.
My Lords, at the request of our convener, I would like to associate all noble lords who sit on these benches including my noble and learned colleagues, with the moving tributes which have been paid to Lord Gardiner as Lord Chancellor and to the expressions of sadness at his passing.
My lords, may I, who come from a very different part of the political spectrum, just add, I think, three things about him. The first relates to his war service. He was, I suppose, a pacifist. He served in the Friends' Ambulance Service because he was too proud not to expose himself to considerable danger, rather than rely simply upon his opposition to fighting. My lords, the noble Lord Jenkins of Hillhead has referred indirectly to the Law Commission. This, I think, will go down to history as his most enduring and valuable achievement. And I would like to say how I think all his successors have made use of it to the infinite advantage of the public. The third thing, which has been, of course, touched on by all, was his immense uprightness of character, his utter intellectual honesty, and his courage and impartiality as a member of my profession. I shall miss him very much indeed.
As someone who helped to introduce Gerald Gardiner into this house and was later leader of the house when he was Lord Chancellor, perhaps I may be allowed to add a very few words to the fine tributes already paid. I won't attempt to run over his career, but I will just put on record my own conviction that no one did as much as he did, though many did a lot, for the abolition of capital punishment as Gerald Gardiner. And then perhaps, before I sit down, I can introduce a slightly lighter note. When I did introduce Gerald Gardiner into the House, Lords, my fellow sponsor was Lord Silkin, and thereby hangs a bit of a tale. Not long before, Lord Silkin had brought an action for libel against the Sunday Express. He'd noticed that the late Randolph Churchill had won an action against the Sunday Express. What he hadn't noticed was that when Randolph Churchill won his action, Gerald Gardiner was acting for him, but by this time he was acting for the Sunday Express. And I remember Lord Silkin coming to join me in the House Lords at lunch after he'd been cross-examined by Gerald Gardiner. He was a very honest man, Silkin. He revealed his feelings totally, and he was very perplexed about the whole thing. He said, you know, Gerald began by asking me in cross-examination, don't you think this is a silly action to bring? Don't you think this is a silly action to bring, Lord Silkin? And Silkin said, well, you know, as a matter of fact, put like that, I thought he was absolutely right. So he not surprisingly, lost the action. But what was interesting was, and he did a lot of credit to both of them, was that when Gerald Gardiner came to take his seat here, the two sponsors he chose were myself and Lewis Silkin. And one other little reminiscence, when I resigned from the Cabinet because of the failure to raise the school leaving age, that's all history before most of the people here were born, but then that happened. Other colleagues expressed some mild regret. I remember Lord Jenkins, 6 months later, said he very nearly wrote to me. I remember that. And that was that just happens to be true. But I took it and I was very grateful for that expression of what might have happened, yeah. But Gerald was the only person who made a serious effort to dissuade me. He came to see me at my flat, and he was a very shy man, as we all recall. And it really cost him an awful effort, but he called on me at my flat to try to dissuade me, and he adopted the same sort of tactic as he had adopted with Lewis Silkin. He said to me, now, if you could be absolutely sure that the school leaving age was going to be raised in 2 years' time, would you resign? Well, I felt like Lord Silkin. There might be, perhaps he was in the right there, but luckily I had committed myself already publicly, so there was no way back. However, I only tell that story to show how extraordinarily kind he was, and I think we all know that. No, to me, he, along with Lord Attlee, was a truly great man. No one could have looked less like Lord Attlee than he did, but he was, in each case, the same emphasis on efficiency, but the total selflessness and dedication. My thoughts at this moment are with Muriel and Carol and Leonora. I know they'll be greatly heartened by all that noble lords have said today.
My Lord, may I very briefly from these benches, and as a former very junior colleague of Lord Gardiner, pay my tribute to him also. He was, as has been said, a great reformer, a persistent, almost stubborn reformer. Yet he combined with that persistence and stubbornness enormous gentleness, humanity, and goodness. He was, in every sense of the word, a gentleman, and all of us who had the privilege of knowing him and of working with him are the better for it.
I beg leave to ask a question, standing my name in the order paper.